Hey guys, in this video, I want to talk about exposing log on a wedding day. And guys, I know probably the best way to expose log with a camera is with something massive like this, a rig with a huge monitor so you can check your waveform. But on a wedding day, if you go up to people like this, often they're gonna not feel necessarily at ease. So whilst a monitor is, a valid technique, and some people use that and they can do great work with it, for me personally, I want to try and explore utilizing just the back monitor that we get here. Hey guys, so when it comes to exposing log, there's a few techniques we can use. And it may vary a little bit depending on your camera systems, but generally there's going to be quite similar features and capabilities, guys. So the first most fundamental feature we can use is something called Gamma Display Assist with Sony. And that just changes it. When you look at the back of the image, instead of seeing like a log image, you can see what it may look like with the appropriate color space transform or LUT put on. Some other cameras and monitors you can install your own LUTs on, so that can be super useful as well. So step one is basically either install a LUT or put your Gamma Display function on. Sorry, there is some construction work going on, so hopefully the voice isolation tool can work quite well for me here. Okay guys, so the second technique we're going to look at is called exposing to the right. That basically means we want to try and protect our highlights, but we put zebras at the maximum cutoff level, and we check that we don't go into that level, but we try and push the brightness all the way up to that level so we can lift the blacks and stay away from that noise. So guys, on Sony cameras, when we're shooting an S-Log3, we want to set the zebra level at plus 94. So make sure you're on lower limit and then 94 plus. That's the most accurate way of doing it. There is a default 95 setting, which is probably more or less all right. But for accuracy, if we go to a lower limit of 94 plus, for shooting S-Log3, that is the sort of peaking level. So if I turn my camera towards the sun, we can start to see some zebras appear, and that means this area is getting a bit blown out. And this is quite a high contrast image as well, guys, so it is a tricky one. But basically, I could lower the exposure, I could increase the shutter speed a little bit, just till that's gone. But now I can see my multimetering is saying +1, which is a little bit low. Normally we want to be around 1.7 or 2. So that just means that maybe some of these shadowy regions are going to be a little bit dark. And if I want to visualize that, I can hit display. And I can see my histogram. And in my histogram, it's kind of showing that I'm exposing to the left a bit, which is kind of the opposite. But I am protecting my highlights here, guys. So this is going to be a kind of situation where you either allow the highlights to stay in and have a bit of noise in your shadows, or I can raise it. I can drop my exposure down to +50. And I can protect my shadows and let the sky blow out a little bit. You see that little peaking bar there? That means I'm losing some detail in the highlights there. So I would probably try, if I had the option, I'd probably try and point the camera away from that super bright area to try and protect as much of the sky as possible. But obviously that's not always going to be an option, guys. So that's exposing to the right. A more simpler way could be just to use the multi-metering mode and just look at that and go for either +1.7 or +2. So if I was going to go for +2 here, I'd have to open my ND up a little bit. And at +2 here, I am losing a bit of sky. I can tell with my zebras. I go across from here, more is starting to flash, which means I've gone probably too far now. But guys, I want to try something where I'm going to point at the sky. There's 1.7. So now 1.7, how is it looking, guys? Have I lost a bit too much shadow in the trees? Or is it coming out well? Basically, the question is, do we prefer the +2 or do we prefer the zebra warning? This is when the first zebra warning comes in. I would still be flashing +2 here. I've got a feeling that could be quite a good image as well. So guys, in these examples, I feel like using zebras to protect the highlights is giving me the best results. But if we introduce people to our images, we must make sure skin tones come out clean. We're going to demonstrate what it's going to be like if you're shooting with a strong backlight. This situation could be if you're shooting an outdoor ceremony and there's a sunlight coming from behind the bride and she's put in the shadow. Or it could also be if you're inside and there's a light coming in through a window, very brightly shining back, and again, you're on the shadow side of the bride or the person you're filming. And in a situation like this, if we were exposing for 1.7, we're going to find that the skin tones become very dark and muddy here. And we may also find if we're exposing our zebras at 95, it's going to tell us, look, we've lost too much detail here, so we have to bring the image down to maintain the detail. But guys, if we had done that, her skin tones just wouldn't have come out as nice. So in this situation, we do have to expose for the skin. And to do that, we use zebras. We've got a couple of cameras here, and at the moment you can see we're on +2, but her skin is very dark and we're going to get a very muddy image if we look at that. And if we scaled that back to a 1.7, she's almost pitch black there, guys. It's going to be an absolutely devastating image if we rely on the multimetering to give us a reading there. So that's at 1.7. So guys, the correct way to do this is going to be for exposing for the skin tones, and the way that we can do that properly is by using zebras. So guys, I'm going to hit function, I'm going to hit custom setting, I'm going to put my zebra level at 50 ±5. I'm going to turn the zebra on, and now I'm going to expose until the zebras come onto the skin tones. Okay, so now we have the zebras on 50 at the skin tone, so we know the skin is well exposed, but we can see obviously the light is very bright, so we're going to be losing a bit of detail. So I'm just going to try a couple of settings of zebras to see which is going to give us the best effect. So 50 is optimal for skin tones, but let's try pulling it down a little bit. Try down to 40, and that's how it's looking at 40. Are we getting any more detail behind her? And then one more time, let's take it down to 30. How are the skin tones there? They're probably getting a little bit muddy by this point. And guys, we're still flashing above 2. So if you're using a multimetering method, your skin tones are going to already be worse than this. All right. Let's try one more sample. Take it at 45. There we go. So that's 45. That's 40. This is at 35. And this is at 30. So guys, we definitely can't use multimetering to expose skins in a strong backlit scenario. We can get good skin tones at 40 IRE, but by 35 they're getting a bit noisy. But I'd say still acceptable. By 30 IRE, however, it's too noisy. However, using DaVinci's noise reduction, we can still save the image. I would suggest stay at 40 IRE for backlit situations, unless the background is spectacular and you're willing to do a little bit of noise reduction, in which case drop it to 35 or 30. Alright guys, I hope that helps. In the next situation, we're going to try shooting the bright light on the face with a dark background, which is what you might experience if you're shooting speeches and someone's got a spotlight on them in a dark room. Okay guys, so we're in the opposite side of the spectrum now, where we've got a bright light, like a spotlight, shining on the lady, and it could be, you know, a sample of what it's like during the speeches, where someone's got a spotlight on them and there's that dark wall behind them. And let's see what we're looking at now. So if we expose to +2, like is often recommended, in this situation, so what we have to do here is, again, expose for the skin tones. So let's press function, and this time, let's take that up to 50. And get the zebras on her skin. And now that should give us a cleaner image. But guys, if we've got a very dark background, we could be getting some noise in there. So we might want to lighten it up a little bit. So we're going to go to the other side now and try and push up the skin tones. So 50 is optimal, but let's try 55. And now let's push that up to 60. And now let's try pushing that up to 70. Or let's go for 65. And finally, let's try at 70. All right, guys, let's see what they look like on the big screen. So guys, these tests were a lot more forgiving than the backlit situation. Skin tones were still looking great even at 70 IRE. Using multimetering at +2.0 worked well here. I would probably still recommend using zebras if you have a darker background, as my backdrop was probably reflecting a bit of light here. So guys, do go for the higher levels of brightness such as 70 IRE to avoid noise in the background. Hey guys, so another thing that we have to keep in mind is our ISOs when we're shooting in log. We really want to keep to our base ISOs, if possible, or close to them. we start getting too far away from our base ISOs, then we can introduce quite a lot of noise. So I'm just going to demonstrate that now. So on the Sony a7S III, the FX3, the ZV-E1, the base ISOs are 640 and 12800. So check those out for your camera if you're using something different. I know for the a7 IV it's 800 and 3200. So basically, look, when we're shooting at our base ISO of 640, we should be getting a nice clean image. I'm going to keep the exposure value at +2. So then let's increase the ISO up to 1250. And let's keep that exposure at +2. Here we go. So it's still quite close to 640, so it shouldn't be a problem at the moment. But then let's crank it right up to 3200. Now it's getting a little bit fast. We might be starting to introduce some noise here. And then let's crank it up to 6400. Keep it at +2. How's that looking, guys? And now let's do the worst option, which would be 10,000. Here we are at +2 at 10,000. So that should be pretty noisy, guys. Let's pull it back to 8,000, just try that one. And that's still probably quite noisy. How's it looking, guys? So basically, we want to keep our ISOs as close to 640 as possible. It's going to be super useful, guys, if you've got something like this, which is an ND filter. That just gives us another way of adjusting our exposure. But guys, you can't cheap out on them. You've got to get a good one. You're looking about at least $100 really for a good variable ND. Otherwise, it is going to change the colors of your image. You need a crystal clear one if possible. And that's also going to be really important if you're shooting inside, because remember, if you're shooting inside, we need to keep our shutter speeds in line with the frequency of the lights. So that's either at 50 Hertz for the UK or 60 Hertz in America. And check if you're anywhere else, you've got to check the frequency of your lights and try and keep your shutter speed in line with that to avoid flicker. Sometimes you can get away with doing multiples, like doing a 50 or 100. But if you start going in between those levels, you're going to start introducing flicker a lot of the time. So avoid that if possible, guys. Hey guys, so I hope that helps with shooting log. Just remember, you know, in those extreme backlit situations, it's really important that we expose for the skin with zebras, and we want to be definitely above 30, probably around the 40 level for zebras to try and capture some of those highlights, but make sure the skin is looking really good. At the opposite scale of things, it wasn't too bad if skin tones are much higher than the standard sort of 50 level. Actually, the skin tones were still looking good at 70. But bear in mind, my test might not have been very powerful, guys, with quite a lot of light being bounced back from that screen. So if you had a truly dark region behind someone, definitely still expose for the skin tones. Don't use the multimetering, because you could blow out the skin tones in an extreme situation. I'd probably recommend in those sort of situations, expose the skin around 70 and save some of those dark regions from going too noisy. Otherwise, most of the time, we want to be exposing to the right. Keep your zebras at the peaking level, whether it's 94 plus or whatever your camera system is. Keep those zebras on so you can see if you've gone above the maximum level, and just try and nudge it down just below that, and look for those optimum ranges, whether it's +1.7 or +2. If you've got a little bit of time, you can check your histogram as well to see, even if you are peaking in some of the brightest areas, we don't want to have too much of the footage in the darker areas, because we might be losing data in the shadows. So if you have time, do check the histogram as well. But I understand in a run and gun situation like a wedding, normally we haven't got time for that. So normally the way I work is just keep those zebras at 94, go for 1.7 or +2 on the multimetering, and then just double check in those extreme situations, especially if it's something like the speeches or ceremony and you've just got one shot that you've got a while to expose, and it's going to be like locked in for half an hour or so. So you definitely use those histograms and the skin zebras there just to check. The problem with using skin zebras all day, guys, is it's hard to see what you're filming because the image is sort of distorted too much. So it's only in a few situations like that extreme backlight situation at a ceremony where the skin exposure can come in really useful. Hope that helps, guys. I'll see you in the next video.